And he proposes two things. He proposes that the state must take more responsibility for providing resources, but also that it's very important to have a thickening of intermediate institutions which are governed not by prices, not by taxes, but by reciprocities, where people exchange things, and the only expectation they have is that somebody will contribute something to the common good. So for him, there was a real possibility that this might happen. And interestingly, at the end of his book, he nominates Britain as the place where this is most likely to happen. And indeed, after World War II, Britain did pioneer a whole series of public institutions which developed this idea. It's those institutions, that great arc of public provision, that has now been taken apart. And what we see as a result of 2 decades of the reversal of that philosophy and the acceleration of commodification is a very weak defence of public institutions for their, as Tony Judd, the historian, says, on the grounds of collective interest. Now, there's often a confusion. This is a kind of complex thing, but let me just try to summarise it. If you take the 3 great slogans of the French Revolution, 3 great principles, liberty, equality, fraternity, it became clear very quickly that there was a tension between the two, between the 3. So that liberty was came quickly to be identified with individual choice, whereas equality and mutuality became identified with social interventions to guarantee certain minimum conditions. I think the US has taken that individualized notion of liberty as far as it can go. But what, and I have to say, I mean, if there are any Tea Party people here, I'm sorry if I'm going to upset you, but I simply can't understand the debate about socialised healthcare here. I mean, we've had a national health system for a long time, and we're incredibly proud of it. And I can count numerous people who would have died had it not been for that health system. I just simply cannot understand why, on the grounds of civilization and equity, you don't want everybody to have a fair chance of being cared for in the way that's appropriate to their dignity, but that's something else. But the important thing about liberty, of course, is that it's empty unless people have the resources. So if you think of liberty as the capacity to act in the world competently and in pursuit of your own interests, you need to have resources to do that. They don't fall out of the sky. And by and large, the market won't provide them, which is why in the European tradition, we spent so long puzzling over how the state could make good that gap and what forms those provisions should take and how they should be accountable and so on. But right now, there's a huge exhaustion of interest and commitment to this history of the public good. Another way you can think of it is and one I've used a lot in my own work, is the metaphor of enclosure. Enclosure begins in Britain under the Tudors. So you have common land, which was used by villagers collectively for all sorts of things. You could graze sheep, you could gather firewood, you could pick wild fruits and so on. But suddenly that land, which was essential to the kind of life of these villagers, is fenced off by the new agricultural landlords and becomes private property. Now, the history of capitalism is a history of enclosure. It's a history of progressively fencing off areas of life and then charging for the privilege of entering them, whereas before they were free. So the notion of the commons is a very potent notion. And one of the ways you can read this history of the creation of this great arc of public provision is to try to reconstitute the commons, to try to make a commons for an urban industrial society, to make spaces where people could gather. For example, Hyde Park wasn't always a public park. It had to be struggled for. Great chunks of London around the university were originally built by private landlords who fenced them off and patrolled them with ex-servicemen. And there was a huge struggle going over 30 years to make the streets public so that everybody could use them. But that history, that commitment to having a public space that we can all share and resources that are open to everybody is now very much on the defensive. So when we come to the internet, what we see is these three histories, the history of commodities, the history of public goods, and the history of gifts, suddenly converging in a single kind of space. Let's take commodification. This is a system for children. Tremor is a society for children established by Procter & Gamble. What it basically does is to commodify children's friendships. Children are invited to join this Tremor society. They get to try out new products, but the most important thing is that they're instructed to talk up those products with their friends, either face-to-face or on their Facebook pages. If you look closely at my Facebook page, you'll see that I don't talk up any products at all. But nobody's asked me to, and very unlikely to. So here you see a good example of the way commerce is beginning to invade, well, not beginning, but is moving into every crevice of social life. Because the great thing about the internet is its participatory engagement potential. So corporations are very interested in this. Here's another one from the UK, Doobit. Notice Doobit Insiders, they're called. This is from their website, lets young people aged 7 to 24 talk up brands. Now, 7-year-old children are working for the corporation, talking up the brands in the playground, on Bebo and so on. So this is a very good example of what Marx is pointing out, that in the end everything potentially becomes commodified. The current jargon is monetized. If you look at the economic literature on the internet, the great thing is, how do you monetize these opportunities? How do you make money out of them? But there's something else lurking behind this, which is a very powerful idea, which is shared by a number of governments around the world, including my own, which is that as economic life in the advanced societies moves from the old industrial heartlands and it moves towards immaterial production, it moves towards knowledge, information, creative activity of all kinds. So the future of the capitalist economies of the advanced countries will be in these industries. So what the creative industries, including all the media industries, are now not just a sideshow. They're actually central to the future of the economic viability. And so they've begun to attract a huge amount of attention from government. I mean, when I first started this, they were seen to be much less important than industries like shipbuilding or steel. That's all gone. The creative industries, along with the financial services industries, are seen to be the centres of the new economic order.